Well, good afternoon, everybody, and thank you for coming out on a Sunday afternoon, especially with all those exams going on. I noticed as I was walking around the various rooms, there were lots of students with their heads buried into the desk, and I was reminded of what I used to be doing more than 30 years ago. So, again, appreciate your coming over. So, what I'd like to do, as Sudhir talked about, is share with you my experiences as an entrepreneur. And Sudhir is very generous. I wish I could be everything that he says, but I will aspire to be there. So, but let me tell you about what history I have as working as an entrepreneur in the first company that I did. It's very interesting for me to share it with you because it was at a time where in the US there weren't too many Indian entrepreneurs. So this was, I started my first company in 1982, and in about the same time frame, a couple of other Indian entrepreneurs also started their companies, people like Suhas Patel, Kanwal Rekhi. So we're about the same pedigree, if you will, in terms of time frame. We didn't connect with each other. There was no network to talk to. There was no role models to look at. There was no people that we could go to and say, can I borrow money from you? Because we didn't know the people that had the money. So it was an interesting time frame, but nevertheless, you know how people have a way of evolving. So when you decide that you want to do certain things, you figure out a way to make it happen. So that's what happened to us. So I want to share that experience with you, and also what I learned along the way that I find very applicable to anybody that wants to be an entrepreneur or a business person of any substance. What are some of the things that you have to be prepared to implement, or what are some of the principles that you have to be willing to live by? So I think those are what I thought I'd share with you, and please feel free to ask me questions later, preferably at the end, and I'll be happy to share anything that I can come up with. So I just made a list of some of the points that I want to cover with you. So I think the first and foremost thing is, if you want to start a venture, you really have to find an opportunity. Right? Something that is, if you're going to do a startup, you have to find an opportunity that exists that you can service or you can handle, and that some other people are not there to handle. Now, obviously, if that opportunity was very easy to handle, then everybody else would pile into it. Or if everybody knew about it, they would pile into doing that. So there must be some risk associated with it. If you think you found something that's the greatest thing since a slice of bread, and there's no risk in it, please don't go to it. Okay? Because if there was no risk, somebody else would be there also. So very important is when you're trying to go for an opportunity which you have identified, make sure that there is some significant element of risk associated with it, otherwise question yourself. So let me relate back to how I got started. So I had left IBM, and I was reasonably recognized in one particular technology area that I had done some research and development in. And I was working at Wang Laboratories for the last year after working with IBM. And what happened when I went to Wang Laboratories, and this is important because in IBM I was exposed only to internal design tools. These are design tools to design computer chips, semiconductor chips. But when I went to Wang Laboratories, I got exposed to commercially available tools because it was my job to put a system together using commercially available design tools. So as I started to do that, I learned that there was an opportunity in that the very area that I understood well did not have a good commercial tool available for it. IBM had that tool, AT&T had that tool, Honeywell had that tool, but companies like Wang and a lot of other system design companies did not have that particular tool. And as it turned out, circumstances push you in certain directions. It became obvious after 1 year that Wang was not interested seriously in pursuing the direction for which I had been hired. So I obviously had to look for a change. So the change I took, instead of going to IBM and saying, please hire me back, which I think they would have. At least they told me that I was rehirable, which is very unusual. And I said, why not look at the opportunity that I'm seeing? There's no tool for doing this in the marketplace. Why don't I make such a tool? And I think one advantage that I had was that I was reasonably well connected technically in the industry. So I called a number of people and I asked them, listen, remember this is a person that has never done any marketing, has never done any sales. I'm an engineer by background. first level manager. So I called up these people and I said, a guy from Texas Instruments, if I make this particular tool, would you have need for it? I said, absolutely, we could use it. Then I called somebody from Raytheon, because these are all companies that were doing system level design, they were using chips, they were putting chips together on boards, and they had a need to use that particular kind of tool. It is a tool to help test that combination of chips. I got validation that Raytheon also wanted it. And similarly, I talked to a few other companies like AMD and Motorola, and that was the same universal validation that I got. So I decided that there was opportunity. Obviously, there was a lot of risk because I had only one year's worth of money to survive, and I had no commercial experience. I had no equipment and all that. But this is where the drive comes in, is that you say, okay, no matter what, we're going to do it. So I decided that I would jump into that and do it myself. So here's where the tool got developed. I took a Radio Shack machine, Mod 2 as an intelligent workstation, got time sharing on a wax machine 750. I don't know if many of you even remember those machines now. That was 30 miles away on a 300 baud line. How many of you used to megabit lines? This was 300 bits per second communication line. And I used that to develop my software and wrote it in Fortran. And that's how my first product got launched. In parallel, of course, you need to have money on the table for buying food and so on. So I sold my consulting services for $1,000 a day, take it or leave it kind of option. And some people were smart enough to take it or dumb enough to take it. So I was able to make just enough money to break even at home. So I did this for about a year. And over this 1 year process, I was able to get Texas Instruments and Raytheon and a few other companies to start to interact with me in evaluating this tool. So now I'm introducing you to the risk element. There's a lot of risk over here because the market has never been validated. It's my validation that those people are going to pay for it. How much are they going to pay for it? I still don't know. So I have to set the price on the product myself. So I decided that since it was a mainframe product, and most of you probably forgot what mainframes are by now, I said I'm going to charge $150,000 for one license. I don't know how I came up with that number, but I remember that one tool that I had bought for Wang seemed to have a price in that range. So that's how I justified my pricing. And that's what I told them. They didn't bat an eyelid. So I said, I think my price is at least acceptable. Now, the thing that I wanted to bring out over here is, what is the, and I'll go with a little bit of the story and then I'll go back to the lessons learned with this. So now Raytheon does an evaluation of my product. They take a design and they run it through my system and it works. So now I have to negotiate with a room full of 15 negotiators, contracts people from Raytheon, and I'm alone because I have nobody else on my team. And I have to negotiate my contract with them. And it takes like 3 to 4 months, meetings after meetings after meetings. Here's Texas Instruments on the other side. They tell me that, Prabhu, we like your software, we will want to evaluate it, but we're going to give you 24 hours. Since you don't have an office, you're working out of your house. And so we were working out of my bedroom. So we will come to the hotel close to your house. We'll bring the circuit design with us. And we'll give you 24 hours, and then whatever results you produce, we'll test them back in our office, and then we'll decide. So I said, okay. They said, no, how many of you know what a gate is and what a transistor is? Right? Oh, good. So good electrical engineering background. So they told me that they would give me a gate level design. That means AND gates, OR gates, NAND gates, NOR gates, etc. But what they actually brought was a transistor level design. There's a very big difference between the two. And I had just upgraded my software to start handling transistor level design, and it was at beta level in terms of whether it worked or didn't work. But when I saw the design and I had 24 hours, it was all transistor level. So I stayed up all night to work on that design. And what saved me was that in my software, I was a good software engineer. I put in lots of tools in there to be able to trap errors in writing software. There's errors in logic, errors in the software itself, and I put even error correction tools. Okay, mind you, this is 82, 83 time frame. And I put lots of error correction tools as well. And I made a lot of decisions in generating whatever data I used to generate in a tabular manner. So it was all decision table driven. so could very easily make changes in the software. Remember, I had a 300 baud line going to a back 750 to do the compilation and so on. Over that night, I found 35 bugs in my software, courtesy of all these traps, self-checking, and a program that would continue to run even if it found failures, because the beauty about the task at hand was that even when you were working on a small problem and it failed, you could continue to work on the next problem, right? So with that, destiny has it that I was successful. I was able to produce the results. The Texas Instruments took them back to their office and said, okay, we'd like to buy the food. So about 18 months later, after I quit Wang, I had 2 orders in my hand, one from Texas Instruments and one from Raytheon, each for $150,000. And that became my seed capital for the company. That's how, then I started hiring other people and started building up the rest of the company. So I want to go back to this and just talk about a few things in just this period of time. So here I was faced in a situation where I had no network. Early in the morning when we were talking to some of the students from the FFE, I was emphasizing to them the critical importance of building a very good network. People that you know from the financial industry, if you're being an entrepreneur, people who you know who are good technologists, people who are good sales and marketing people. Because when you're going to build a company, these are some of the people that you have to bring together. No one person can make a kingdom, right? A single man kingdom is, he's the king and the janitor both, right? So you have to basically attract a lot of people to be able to build something big. And how do you attract these people? You have to know them. There has to be a trust equation. Why would they come work for you if they haven't known you before? So these are some of the reasons why you have to have a network. So I did not have the network on the financial side, and I did not have the network on the sales and marketing side. I had the network on the technical side. External capital, I had no money. I had $100,000 in the bank. I have to confess. Half of it came as an award from IBM, and the other half was my savings in the last 8 years. So I decided that I could live for 1 year on my own capital, even if I did not get any money from the outside. But I believed enough in what I was doing that I said, come hell or high water, I'm going to make this successful. So that talks to the next point that I have, is faith and confidence. You absolutely have to believe in yourself if you're going to be successful. Because you are taking risk, and it's that faith that drives you, that makes you successful. If you don't have that confidence and faith, you will actually work against yourself. Okay? Whereas if you have that faith and confidence, you will actually overcome the doubts and the barriers that other people see. I think if you look at Steve Jobs' book, you'll read that book and you'll find many examples where he got people to accomplish in 3 or 4 days what people didn't believe could be done in 30 days. Why? Because he had that confidence. He could inspire them to believe that they could do it, and then they would find ways that they hadn't even thought about. So that is very key to success. And then the other factor is comfort versus risk. You have to decide whether you want to put yourself into a zone of discomfort. If you're going to do a startup, or if you're going to do something in which you're not sure whether you're going to earn enough money to feed the kids, to keep the wife happy, to be able to pay your rent, it puts you in a situation where you're uncomfortable. And you have to be able to measure whether you can deal with the risk that comes along with it. In my case, I actually had one advantage, at least in those days. I'm not sure that advantage exists today. That I felt that if I failed, I could easily find a job at AT&T or IBM. They would hire me. So I said my downside is quite limited. My downside is $100,000 in the bank that I lose, but at least I'll have a job, a reasonable job. So that's how I assured myself that my downside risk was contained. And my upside was obviously good. So being a betting man, you bet on your upside and say my downside is limited, so I'll go take that job. That's what I did. So the 1 year of survival cash was very critical to be able to survive. So I'm just sharing with you the logic and thinking that happened in my head at the time during this first year, 18 months, in picking the opportunity that I picked, with taking the risk that I took, what is it that I needed, and what is it that I not needed. So I did not have sales and marketing people. I did all the sales and marketing myself. I did not know how to sell or market, but then nobody told me I didn't know it, so I went and did it anyway. And I used to make hundreds of calls a day. to people that I knew all over the country, and I used that as my way to sell. And fortunately, it worked to a point where I generated the first few orders from which I could recruit other people. Another very important lesson in this is market choice. You cannot pick a market or an area in which you don't have core competence yourself. Okay? Either you must have the core competence within you, or you must have core competence in some very trusted partner that has come onto your team that is going to be able to provide that capability or that product or that solution to the marketplace. If that core competence does not exist, it's a struggle to be able to compete against people that have that. Don't even bother trying that. So core competence in a market area that you have picked is very, very essential. The capital requirement. Mine was truly a garage operation. We actually worked out of, fortunately we had a big house because Wang was generous in their salary, but my mortgage interest was 19%. Because in 1981, if you remember, inflation was going through the roof. So I had a huge mortgage payment to make, but I still decided to take the chance because opportunity does not come at a time when it's convenient to you. Opportunity comes at a time when it's available. So you cannot say, let me wait for the interest rates to drop to 5%, so my mortgage rate will come down and then I will jump into it. It does not happen like that. So I still took that jump, and I funded it based on my own funds as well as consulting. I had practically no hope that I could find venture capital money anywhere. Simply because nobody in that venture community would have known me. I was on the East Coast. Most of the venture money was on the West Coast. And on the East Coast, that's the Boston area versus Silicon Valley. And there were a lot fewer venture capitalists on the East Coast, not to mention that nobody knew you, which makes it even harder to approach them. So mine was a true garage operation from inside the house. In fact, the first person that I hired after I got those orders from Raytheon and Texas Instruments was a man from UK that I had met when I was out trying to acquire commercially available tools for Wang laboratories. This was in a product area that was different from what I was developing myself. This person's expertise or core competence. I was developing a tool that would automatically generate the stimulus and response for a design to be able to evaluate whether it works or not after it's manufactured. His expertise was in the area of simulation, which many of you may have used simulation tools and chip design, is where you can, in software, evaluate whether your design does what you want it to do or not, by applying back stimulus to it and looking at the behavior. So this guy was a world-class expert in that area. And I was very fortunate to run into him because I was one of his customers. So I had spent many days with him in the United Kingdom evaluating his tool. So in the process I learned that this guy is really good. And somehow the relationship clicked that 18 months later he called me and said, Prabhu, I want to come to the United States. Can you help me come to the United States? And I was a single man show. I had never sponsored anybody for a visa. I said, yes, I'll do it. And he actually came and stayed with us. Poonam was the guest, was the host, and he was the guest, and she would take care of his laundry, she would cook for him, and all of those things. So we shared a little space together. That's how he came and joined. And he said, I want to develop the world's best simulator, starting with the previous one that he had, which I recognized to be a very high quality product. So I gave him a clean slate and I said, here, I have the funds, you go do it. That's how I recruited somebody who ultimately produced the product that became the showcase product for the company. So what I developed probably generated $8 to $10 million of revenue in the 7-8 years that we were alone before Cadence acquired us. But the product that he developed was the one that became the flagship of the company. It was a product called Verilog. Anybody here has heard the name Verilog? Yes. Oh, you have? Okay. Okay. So that was the product that came out of my company. And this guy, his name is Philip Morby. He was the architect of that product. And we produced that product at a time when the industry analysts, when I would go to a show in the exhibition area, the industry analysts would come to me and say, Prabhu, are you crazy? Why does the world need another simulator? It was almost similar to what Thomas Watson used to say in the when the supercomputers were developed, when he said, the world does not need more than 6 mainframes, right? The analysts were literally thinking like that. So here we were believing in a very young startup with very scarce cash that we would do another simulator when he was analysts. These are industry analysts that write about cadence and valid logic and mentor graphics. Those were very high-flying companies in those days. He would say, you're wasting your time. Why are you doing this effort? So this is the environment in which we were doing product development and selling. And the interesting thing that I learned about selling, because I wasn't a trained salesman, what sold was my passion. When I would go in front of a customer, I really believed in the product. I really believed that either the test generation product that I had developed or the simulation product, which was Verilog, was so good that you as a customer had absolutely no choice but to buy it. I mean, I would sit over here and say, if you don't buy it, you'll be sorry. Right? It's literally that level of conviction that I had. So when I was able to go into these various customer situations, and I would speak with that level of conviction, after a while, people's confidence rubs off on you. And so my confidence rubbed off on them. And I was able to get into places like Sun Microsystems. I actually had a very early meeting with Vinod Khosla when he was still a young CEO, and Sun Microsystems actually ended up adopting my product corporate-wide. And all of Sun's products were designed using Verilog, starting in 86, 87 time period. They had a corporate-wide license of our product. It is that kind of selling that got us to start with. It is the passion. No expertise necessary to sell, but it's the passion of whether you have a good product, whether you have something that's useful to the customer, and whether it's going to make a difference in their lives. Use that to get into companies like AMD, Motorola, National Semiconductor, and before you know it, all of a sudden the industry started to recognize that there was something interesting over here. Before that, the world didn't need it, and now all of a sudden it was interesting because now people from these companies would start going around and saying, yeah, this is something interesting, other companies should also buy it. So, as we were moving along, we recognized that the product that we had designed was actually, in the simulation space, was taking high-level design at a conceptual level and refining it down to the gate level. So gate level is where you can typically implement it. But then the problem that we found was that at the gate level, to translate that into a physical chip, we were missing a significant step. And the significant step was that the semiconductor companies that allowed that customization required some proprietary technology that we didn't have access to. So how do we solve that problem? So it turned out that Motorola had started to use our product for designing its next generation microcontrollers. And the group inside Motorola that had adopted that was very influential. So we got them to talk to the people who were in the group called the Gate Array group of Motorola, which was the one where semi-custom chips were being designed. And we made them influence those guys and told them that, look, these guys have also developed, which we developed after the fact, a gate-level simulation speed that was 10 times faster than any other software simulator in the industry. Sometimes we would run even 20 times faster. Sometimes we would even run faster than custom hardware accelerators that had been built for simulation. So we used that as a weapon to get into that group. And they taught us how to customize our product, to be able to add in the proprietary technology that was needed for our customer to be able to implement their gate array, their semi-custom chip. They literally worked with us and told us the technology, and we incorporated that into our product. Having the blessing of Motorola to implement their chips among our customer base literally meant that every customer that was working with Motorola had to buy our product, because we became what's called the golden simulator. If our simulator said your design worked, Motorola would say we will manufacture it and it will work according to this specification. And that was amazingly powerful for us. So then we took that capability and went to National Semiconductor, which had its own semi-custom program, and we said, look what Motorola is doing. How come you're using old simulators? How come you're not using ours? So we took that technology, adapted it to National, and sold it to them. And then to Fairchild, and then we went to the Japanese, to the Mitsubishis, you name it, on all the companies there. Then we went to the European companies like SGS Thomson and so on. So progressively what we discovered that the maximum market that existed for our product was in people that were trying to do these so-called semi-custom chips, not transistor level design, but where they would start from a higher level language, make a gate level design, and then want to map it into silicon. But silicon not at the transistor level, but at a block level, so that they could be assured that their design matched the silicon. And by going into all these companies that were making these semi-custom chips, we literally ended up capturing the semiconductor industry. So when we were, our growth in terms of sales went from, I think we were at about $1.5 million in 1986 time frame, or at least I think I had about $1.5 million in the bank in 1986. No venture money yet. And in 1989, I think we were at almost 25 million in sales, annualized. So we were halfway through a public offering, and then of course Cadence came along and gave us an offer that I decided maybe it's time for me to take an exit over here. I'll talk about that towards the end. But you see the adaptation to the market. So we started in the test generation space with one product, but that was a product that I would have been very happy if I'd made $10 million in revenue over 5 years. I would have had a comfortable retirement. But there was an opportunity that came along when Phil Morby from the UK called and said, I want to come to the US. So created an opportunity out of that was even bigger. And then when he came on board and we started in a certain segment, first we accelerated the product to be able to go after what I call the hardware accelerators. I don't know if you guys still, these are historical names now, companies like Zycad and others that existed a long time ago. They used to sell their tools for several $1 million a piece. They were big hardware boxes that you could use to make simulation run faster. And our software could run faster than those boxes, even though we were running on general purpose machines. So we made that adaptation, and then we did this partnership with Motorola where they literally taught us how to do simulation for custom design. And then we leveraged that into the marketplace. So that is the adaptation that we did in the marketplace. So you have to be nimble. You have to know what your market needs, what your customer needs, and you've got to be able to change and adapt your product or whatever solution you're delivering to the marketplace. So let's talk about venture funding, because along the way, this was in 1986, from 82 to 86, this was all self-funded, using the $300,000 that we got from TI and Raytheon. And then as we were starting to generate the product that I was selling, I was charging like $200,000 a license. Afterwards, when it went into an IBM mainframe, was the VAX mainframe. So we were generating a good amount of cash. We were only 4 or 5 people at that time frame. So we were saving money. We had about $1.5 million in the bank in 1986, and 6 people in the company, including Phil Morby. And now, the Verilog product had been seen by Apollo Computers. I don't know if any of you remember Apollo Computers. It was also a very successful competitor to Sun Micro in those days. So one of the directors from Apollo called up some of the venture community people and said, you know, this company has an interesting product, you should look at them. We did not go talk to venture capitalists ourselves. They actually came to us, which was a very interesting situation. 3 different venture groups approached us and made us offers for money. And we took the lowest valuation. The lowest valuation means they offered us the least for our company, but we went with them instead because they were the highest quality venture capital company. And that company is called Greylock. Today, if you checked in Silicon Valley, it is the hottest venture capital company in Silicon Valley. The amazing success record. And the reason we took their money, with $1.5 million in the bank, 6 people, why would you need money? The reason I needed money, I had no experience with management. I had nobody who was my mentor. I had nobody who I could have tell me, Prabhu, you're doing this wrong, you're doing that wrong. It's very easy for people to tell you what you're doing right or wrong when they don't have a vested interest in your success. How much can you trust that assessment? So the reason you need people on your side is, first of all, they got to give you critique of what you're doing, give you advice. But more importantly also, they have to have a stake in your success. Because otherwise, you have no assurance what is the value of the advice that you get. So in order to make sure that they would help me build up a management team, which I did not have, as well as to be able to have a stake in my success so I could be assured of the advice and guidance that I was getting, is why I took their valuation. Even though it was the lowest, I had the chairman of the board of that company come on my board, and they were an amazing resource to me. I made every single management hire that I made them interview. And I said, if you don't approve it, I'm not going to hire the guy. Of course, you had to first pass our interview, and then we would hire him. But these venture capitalists are very good judge of people. So I wanted to make sure that I was able to get that judgment from them. So that was one of the values that they provided. Why did I take venture capital? So we took actually almost $3 million from them in 1986 and gave away a significant portion of the company. But in that process, it allowed us to scale from 1986, where we were doing about $1.5 million a year, to 1989, where we started to do almost $25 million in a software company which was doing very well for us. So we put in all kinds of processes, hired the right kind of management people, and we had grown to almost 300 people. Starting from 6 people in 86, we were to almost 300 people in 89. So that was the reason why we took venture funding. So that is the impact that comes from having external capital, but you need smart capital. It cannot be just any capital. So when you hear people coming around offering funding for a company, it's not enough to have money. It's important to have smart people who are going to have value from advice, from their network, from their connection, all of that coming to you as well. The next thing that happened along the way is we had created this language called Verilog, which was a high-level description language similar to C, except it was now used by hardware designers as opposed to using VHDL or other languages that existed in the past. It was a very convenient language to use for a hardware designer, except that in order to be able to fully leverage high-level design, you have to find tools that can automatically generate the low-level design from a high-level design. Similar to how C can automatically generate machine code using a C compiler, you wanted to be able to have technology that would do that. We started to do that ourselves internally, but also there was a company called Synopsys. How many of you have heard of Synopsys? Not very many. Not yet, okay. Synopsys is today the largest electronic design automation vendor in the world. The revenues are far in excess of $1 billion a year. And they started to develop this technology of going from a high-level language to a gate-level design. So they said, we would like to license your language, because our language was really the dominant language in the market at that point in time, from the point of view of going from high-level to low-level. So we could have had a choice of saying, no, we want to keep everything to ourselves, and we decided not to do that. We decided we will license it to them because we wanted to enable yet another differentiator in the marketplace for customers that were using our language. So Synopsys used this Verilog license very successfully and offered the synthesis technology to our customers, which turned out to be very good for us, very good for them. And then, after the acquisition of our company by Cadence, we decided to actually put the language in the public domain. Until 1990, Verilog was a proprietary language. It belonged to us. We could control who used it. But we wanted to make it an industry standard because there were competing languages that were coming up. Nobody likes to have proprietary languages. Everybody likes to have open standards and so on. So in recognizing that if we hung on to that for too long, we could create the risk of competition, we put it out in the public domain. So everybody could use the Verilog language. And that also became very powerful because lots of people started to develop tools around that language. So it became a language that had now existed for almost 25 years. And it is still going strong. There hasn't been a hardware description language that has lived that long. Another very important factor in the success of this language was we built a procedural interface. Does that word mean anything to anybody? Procedural interface? So, okay. What it is that you provide a method of accessing the design data. Let's say you designed a chip, and you have stored the design data on a machine. We give you a way to access information about your design and to manipulate it. So all our customers started using that interface to write their own tools against our tool. And after a while, that became so large that their intellectual property running across our interface became so large it was virtually impossible to replace. So we were giving them the ability to extend our technology and customize it to their own purpose. That also ensured the longevity of this particular technology. One very important lesson that I learned as we were building up our management team and as we were hiring people, you got to hire the best people. You got to hire people that are better than yourselves. You got to give them trust. You got to give them freedom to be able to innovate and do what they do best. And that is absolutely critical to success. You cannot be concerned about your own security. You have to be able to create a situation in which the best people can take your job as well. In fact, my open statement to my board was, if you can find a CEO to replace me, that's better than me, I'll be happy to step aside and get somebody else to do my job. Fortunately, they didn't change me until after the acquisition. But anyway, that is the kind of a model that you have to build inside your companies, that the best person should be in the best job that fits them. On marketing and sales, I think I talked about how I leveraged passion. When you do a song and a dance in front of your customer and you show that passion, it does infect them. And it actually sells like you would not believe it. I'll give you a very simple example of a song and dance I did once. We were at Hughes Aircraft, and they were evaluating for a corporate-wide simulator. And Hughes Aircraft is again a name that's probably not there anymore, but been acquired by somebody else. But it was a very big name in our days. And they evaluated 12 simulators, and they said, we're going to pick one. On a Memorial Day weekend, which is a 4-day weekend in the US that particular year, I was sitting in California when the home base was in Boston, and I got a call from the Hughes evaluating manager that said, Prabhu, I got good news for you and bad news. And I said, okay, which one do you want to give me first? He said, the good news is you're selected. I said, good. He said, we've chosen 3 out of 12, and you are one of the 3. I said, then how can there be bad news? He said, the bad news is that there's another company that is tied for the 3rd spot. And next Wednesday, we're going to eliminate one of you. Whoa. Okay. So I said, well, what happened? Because here we were honestly believing and we were sure that we were the best product in the industry. This was around 1986. He said, well, you don't have the ability to do stochastic modeling. I had done some course in probability theory. I said, what does stochastic modeling have to do with digital design? And they said, well, you know, we want to be able to model queues and arrival times and service levels and all those kind of things, because when we model very sophisticated systems, that's some of the techniques that we use, and we want that to be part of our hardware design. Okay, so I said, but who's the guy that came on the #1 spot? It was a company called NDOT. And so I said, I think I know who NDOT is. So I found out the guy who was the developer of NDOT. He was working at Sun Microsystems, and I said, can you give me a book on what is stochastic modeling, and so I can read up about it. This is Friday. So I read about stochastic modeling, and I figured that the thing that was needed in our product was that we needed the ability to create random distributions, like Gaussian distributions, or I've even forgotten all my distributions by now, but all those kind of distributions we need to create. We need to be able to create queues, but we needed to be able to take elements off of queues, add elements off of queues, and that's kind of all the kind of stuff that we needed to be able to do. So I called my team back in Boston and I said, you know, this is the good news and this is the bad news. And would you like to win or would you like to lose? And I said, if you want to win, then every one of you has to cancel your Memorial Day weekend. If you want to lose, then there's no choice. There's nothing to worry about. Guess what? Everybody wanted to win. So everybody canceled their Memorial Day weekend holidays, which in America is not an easy thing to get people to do. And I spec'd out the product on the way back on the plane from California back to Boston. And that's when we created this procedural interface. So we didn't create that interface for the customers. We created that for ourselves to very rapidly develop some new technology that we could not have done otherwise. And using that interface, we provided subroutines that could create these queues and add to the queues, subtract from the queues, and did some very interesting graphical functions as well. And then we went in on Wednesday I flew into Hughes Aircraft and I said, okay, we are here and we want to surprise you. So on Wednesday they invited both vendors to come in and show why they should be eliminated. And I said, we want to show you things that you have not evaluated yet. And we've been working on that for a while. A little bit of lying is okay when you're selling. We've been working on this for a while and we intentionally didn't tell you, but we wanted to show it to you when it was ready. So we showed them a stochastic modeling of a computer system. And along with that, we also had a dynamic graphical display in which we could show the sizes of the queues dynamically going up and down as the computer system changed its behavior. And those guys were just floored. I mean, 30 people in the room, they took a vote, we were selected. Right? So this is an example of getting the best people, getting commitment, and how you can adapt your product and how you can get things done in a very short window. Like Steve Jobs' example I gave you, he got it done in 4 days when people told him it would take 30. Here's an example where we did something very similar, where we implemented some capability that we had not even thought we would ever do, but because there was a need in the marketplace, we implemented that. Then in the marketing and sales, what we did is we leveraged the industry giants. Because we had technology that some of these designers believed in, we got Gordon Bell, we got Gene Amdahl, we got Forrest Baskett, people like that who actually agreed to be our faces in the ad. So we got their faces on full-page ads that we would run in various emotional moods. Gordon Bell would be upset, and Gene Amdahl would be smiling. So they would all recommend our product. What better testimonial if you're trying to sell to the hardware designer than to get these people to endorse your product? That's what we did as we started to scale the company. So the growth was, as I said, 0 to 25 in 7 years. And we were halfway through a public offering with a company that's also not existent anymore called Alex Brown. It was a pretty interesting investment group then. And then Cadence made us an offer. I thought about it. I said, look, I've been working at this for 7 years. And maybe there's a time to exit when you should always leave a situation when you're flying high, not when you're flying low. So I decided that I'm flying high right now. My family is still young. I think I can spend more time with my family too, which I haven't done in the last 7 years. So I agreed to sell the company instead of going to an IPO. Because once you do an IPO, then you have to manage a public company, which is, then you have accountable to lots of people, not just your shareholders, but all the analysts. They keep asking you questions every quarter. Why you haven't done so well? Why haven't you done this? So that's the exit that I took. Spent a couple of years with Cadence after that to help transition the company. Then out. So that was my journey in the first company, and I thought I'd share with you just what happened and a little bit of the lessons that I learned along the way. And if I hope, as you guys, I hope any of you guys build companies rather than just go work for somebody else long term, and that you can use some of these lessons along the way. I learned these firsthand. Would have been great if somebody had taught me these earlier. I would have probably done some things better than I did. But nevertheless, I have no regrets. Thank you.
Questions?
Yes.
I have a question not on the side of making money, but on the side of giving away it. And in which role you are very successful as a philanthropist. However, your role as a philanthropist is as a person who has a very large resource. The way I learned it in terms of crores. But there are a lot of people who...
Can you hear the question at the back? No, I'll repeat it for you.
Okay, there are a lot of people who, at the stage of life that I am more or less in, they have a limited amount of money. They have a limited amount of money and they want to do something back in India. But they face one problem. With that limited amount of money, they do not have access to the corridors of power, which you are likely to have, I don't know. How do they handle this problem? The moment they come, they see a wall of these bureaucrats saying, no, this cannot be done unless you do certain unethical things and so on. How do you suggest that people should handle this problem?
So I think the question, if I could summarize, and please confirm if my understanding is correct, is that I'm doing philanthropy with a lot of resources behind me, which I think you think I have more than I do, but that's a different question. And yeah, I think I've done good marketing. And how does a person with lesser financial resources, but as much wealth, do philanthropy in India, given all the bureaucratic hurdles and challenges that exist over there? I think it's probably a very philosophical question, but I'll share with you my belief. I believe philanthropy can be done through many ways. You can do it by using money, goods, time, labor, all of those things. And at the stage when one is, I think when you're looking at philanthropy, the whole idea is to give to somebody and enjoy the satisfaction or the happiness that comes from giving. So it doesn't always have to be money. It can be either goods, it can be time spent. So if you're looking to build a philanthropic organization, then your question becomes more relevant. I don't know if that's the direction you were taking. But if you're looking at just from a personal satisfaction standpoint, there are many, many ways, because there's so many good organizations that exist already, that if you could find alignment with a cause that you're passionate about, then you can obviously give enough that you will feel very satisfied. So for example, as the organization we had a meeting on this afternoon, the Foundation for Excellence, what I found was that when we were looking for a cause, when we started this back in the early 90s, where there was a leverage effect of what we did. And the leverage effect came from having bright students from a relatively poor family, so that when they became successful, they could be role models for a lot of others, right, and provide that leverage. So that's what we were looking for. But in order for us to be successful, I had to validate that would there be enough other people that would be passionate about this cause, right? So what I did was I socialized this problem, or the fact that I was interested in doing this with many of the other friends that I had in Silicon Valley. And I was quite surprised to find that most of the people that I talked to said, yeah, that's something I would like to do also, right? So that gave me a lot of confidence that this organization would be able to find people, because without people, money alone doesn't do anything. Would find enough people that where somebody is contributing their time, somebody is contributing money, somebody is contributing something else, and this organization succeeds. So I think any organization has a need for like-minded people that feel passionate about a cause. So I would recommend for people who don't have the financial resources to identify a cause that lines up with their passion and then be able to contribute time into that. Yes?
In your speech, you talked about the successes, chances, how you did it. Can you talk about your setbacks and what lessons we can learn from that?
Sure. In fact, I'll tell you about one of my latest setbacks. I started a company called Signet Solar just about 4 years ago. Signet Solar was a company that was manufacturing thin film panels based on applied materials technology, which was similar to making LCD panels. And in 2007, when we started this, solar panels were selling like hotcakes. You couldn't make enough of them. The demand was so high. The margins were very fat. And we believed, wrongly so at the time, that we were smart enough to be able to bring the cost of manufacturing down fast enough that we could continue to make money even if the selling price changed. What we didn't anticipate was China, and the impact China could have had on us. And what we didn't anticipate was the financial crisis of 2008. So we actually went into production at the end of 2008, and in 2009 we sold like $30 million worth of panels. I think it was around 12 megawatts worth of panels we manufactured and sold. Then in 2009, when we put our own money into the company and some investor money, a lot of it was my money. And when we tried to raise debt financing, which is critical, I mean, if you're doing a company that we had already spent like $70 million in this company to build a plant, and now we needed to expand the plant, so we needed to raise debt. We had committed debt financing that banks reneged on because of the financial crisis. So now we had no debt financing, very difficult to expand capacity, and we needed to expand capacity to bring our cost of production down. On top of that came the Chinese. The Chinese started to shellac the price of the solar panel to a point where they're still selling it below cost. How do you compete in an environment where the state or the government of China tells its manufacturers, you go get market share, let us take care of your losses? There are companies like Yingli, is one of the solar panel manufacturers. They have a working capital line from the Chinese government of $2 billion. And the purpose, if you're my customer, I'm going to sell you the panels and I'll give you the loan to buy the panels as well. Right? How does anybody compete against a situation like that? So that was an example of a horrific failure, I'd say, where we shut the company down in 2010, mid-2010. And that was a lesson learned, not to venture into an area unless you had massive financing in an area that did require massive financing.
I'm really referring to your initial years, setbacks in your beginning years, what lessons one can learn.
Okay. I think one of the first setbacks that I had in my initial years in the first company was just before I hired Phil Morby, the Verilog architect. I'd also hired another person from IBM who had some expertise similar to what I had to be able to maintain the product that I had developed. And I was having a back problem because of having tried to stop a car that I shouldn't have tried to stop. And I was lying in bed, and this guy comes along, and so now we're two people working in the company, and he says, "Prabhu, I quit." Okay? And I can barely walk out of bed, and I have customers to support people who are doing evaluations and so on. And that was quite a setback to listen to that message. And I think what the recovery was, I managed to talk him out of it. So his family was ready to move to where his wife's family lived. They did not believe that this company was going to succeed, and I made him stay. He ended up making $5-6 million at the end, which he later told people he never believed he could ever make that. But anyway, he did stick around. So that was an example of a setback. What other setback can I think of? You know, the interesting thing is I forget setbacks. I only remember good things that happened over there. But generally what happens is when you're having a great time, you tend to forget the setbacks and you just focus on going forward. So, but I cannot forget this one because it happened at that time and it was quite painful to hear the message.
Thank you.
There's so many young people here. How important is the first job that you take in shaping, the kind of journey you have had?
Right. I think for me the first job was very important in shaping what I did. I went to work for IBM, and what I learned from IBM was very important in the company that I started, because I actually learned a whole industry. Not how to sell and market to the customer, but how to develop technology and how to use that technology I learned from IBM. I think the way I would focus on, as a person getting into the jobs for the first time, I would understand what is my longer term goal in life. Where do I want to be? If you know where you want to be in 5 years, 10 years, then you should pick your employers based on where you want to go, what skills you want to develop, pick the job based on what skills it will expose you to. So one of the things you should do when you meet an employer, you should say, these are the 3 or 4 skills I want to develop for myself. Please explain to me how this job that I'm going to take is going to help me develop those skills. I think your employer will value you for that. And there's no point in your taking a job which doesn't give you those skills, because then you're not going towards your longer term path, right? So you must always be looking at how am I enhancing myself towards my longer term goals. Without goals, you cannot possibly decide which direction you want to go. So like one time in career counseling I learned at IBM, if you don't have a goal, then anywhere is good enough, right? So same thing goes for a job. If you haven't decided where you want to be in 5 years, 10 years, then any job is good enough. You could be happy as long as you're collecting a reasonable paycheck. But if the key is, if you want to achieve a success in life, you can get a lottery in life, that's also possible. But to achieve to achieve success, which is driven to a certain extent by your efforts, you're going to have to pick goals. You're going to have to decide what is necessary for you to be successful to get to those goals, and you'll be required to find steps along the way to acquire the skills that will allow you to be successful. And that's the way I would pick jobs. So it's not just the first job that matters, it's how long you stick in various jobs. Many companies wouldn't mind having you stay in a job for 5 years, 10 years. You get very good at it, they'll keep paying you reasonable sums of money, you stay there. No, but that's not good for you. What you want to be able to do is develop a well-rounded base towards the goal that you're after, and make sure you ensure that you have flexibility to move around. Yes?
So the product that you developed was mainly a technological one, as I understand, Verilog and the previous one. So I think whatever you learned while doing your PhD or beforehand, all those stuff actually translated into the product, if I am not wrong. So, but beforehand you didn't know that you were going to develop such a product or such a technological creation, design. So what kept you motivated to still do a PhD or go for a PhD? Because collecting, you didn't have a knowledge of that. You would be using whatever you learned, whatever you were learning in the future. Right? So what was the motivation for you to still?
Okay. So I think the question is, you seem to have used what you learned in your PhD studies as well as in IBM and at your workplace to be able to produce whatever product you did because it was the high technology area. So what motivated you to study for your PhD or go on for a PhD not knowing what you were going to do at that point in time, right? Because that only came later. I think the reason to study for a PhD for me was several. One is I had done my undergraduate degree from here, from India. Job opportunities in India were not very interesting in the 1970 time frame. I could have ended up with a company like Metalcraft or Hindustan Levers or some of those where the technical skills were not going to be used. You'd basically become a management trainee and then get on into a task that was not as directly correlated with the skills that you had learned in your undergraduate program. So that's the reason I had to get out of India. At least that's what most of my fellow students justified as to themselves as the reason to leave India and go get to the US, is get on to an advanced degree, hopefully find something exciting to do over there. So that's why I did my graduate studies program. Why did I do my PhD program? I'm not sure that I did my PhD program specifically because I love research. I think in my case it was because first I wanted to have a qualification that opened up lots of opportunities for me. And having a PhD in those days did make that difference. You could find lots of opportunities, whether it's academics or whether it's industrial and so on. That was certainly there. I'm not a classical academician researcher type of a person. So if somebody threw me in a university and said, go do research, I don't think I'm the kind of person that would do that. So my motivation was from a professional standpoint, how can I create value in terms of what output I can create. So after the master's program, I think if I remember right, the US was suffering through quite a recession in those days. The Vietnam War was just coming to an end. It was 1971. Jobs were virtually impossible to get. So in my mind, the question of not doing a PhD didn't even arise. Right? So I did my PhD program with that kind of a mindset that I wanted to achieve certain, broaden my opportunities so that I could pursue more. And to me, PhD was more of an environment in which I could learn how to learn new stuff in an area that had not been explored before. Whereas in your undergraduate program and in your master's program, you tend to study what other people have published in textbooks or papers and so on. But in your research program, you get thrown a problem that nobody has solved before, and now you're asked to research. So I think it introduces, in my mind, I think what it exposed me to was, it forced me into being creative, which was something that I'm not sure that the undergraduate program that I had here at IIT was necessarily driven in with that mindset. And I think that helped me immensely, because that same experience of creativity now I'm able to apply not just to technological problems, but to business problems and so on. Yes?
In your speech you said that experience and connections are very important. So now suppose I am taking up a job after my BTech and I am getting two offers, one from a startup which gives me very less, or one from a large company, for example IBM, where I am just an employee among hundreds of others. So what do you suggest would be a better opportunity? Go in a small scale company and get entrepreneurial experience and technical knowledge based on that, or to a large company?
Okay. So the question is, I said that your network and your technological capabilities become very important as you're going out into the job environment. And the gentleman over here, he has two job offers that you're looking at right now. One with a company like IBM, and another one a startup which is offering a lot less salary. But I hope they're giving you a lot of stock options, right? Because you can't have both, no stock options and less salary. That doesn't work. So the question that he's asking is, what would his choice be? Whether should he go to IBM or should he go to a startup? I think the question I have to ask in terms of what I framed earlier: where do you want to be? Right? You want to be an entrepreneur. Okay. So if you want to be an entrepreneur, I think you have to say, how can I learn to be an entrepreneur the best? Which of the two opportunities would allow me to learn more about entrepreneurship? And that's one of the dimensions that you have to learn. It's not just one. It's not just about being an entrepreneur. You have to learn other skills. You have to be able to come into touch with people who can finance your companies in the future. You have to learn how to get into the market. So if you believe that this startup will allow you to play a role in sales, in marketing, in working with, getting exposed to the investors in the company and so on, and if you want to be an entrepreneur, then the answer is fairly obvious, right? IBM will not give you those opportunities. And I think what the thing is, what you get out of a startup is, after you take a job and there is going to be a function of what you want to get out of it. If you don't make the effort, you will not get it out of it. You will have to consciously go out and farm or harvest the opportunities where you can be exposed to sales, marketing, investors, whatever the market. You have to do that on your own. Nobody's going to push those opportunities towards you. You have to pull them towards you.
So how you decide between the opportunities that you getting and the goals that you have decided, even though the goals that you have decided for your life is totally different from the opportunities that you are getting in your life?
Okay, so how do you decide between opportunities that are not consistent with your goals in life? So I think ultimately, as you know from optimization theory, you have to have an objective function, right? And so if the objective function, you must have some parameters that relate to your goal in life, plus some objective function that deal with surviving in the present and having a reasonable quality of life, and those kind of objective functions as well. So you have to start to optimize the other ones. If it's not going in the direction of your long-term goal, you start to find other reasons why you would choose from between the various jobs. Does that make sense? For example, if you have a higher paying job than a lower paying job, you'd rather take the higher paying job, as an example.
Because if none of them are reaching
Right.
the goal.
If none of them are going to help you towards the goal. But then one of your objectives in life is, even after you've taken that, keep on the lookout for something that will help you get to your goal. It's not necessary that just because you can't meet your goal in a particular job, you don't want to stay unemployed for a year, because then you start to become technically obsolete. And you start to become more unemployable, right? So what you'd rather do is you'd rather take a position where you can get something useful out of it, and in the meantime continue to work towards your goal. Yes.
In this process, is there any role for adapting your goals to the existing situation, changing your goals to replace it, and still have some passion?
So the question is, in a situation like was pointed out by the young lady over there, would there be a role for modifying your goal to fit the current situation so you can still have passion for that situation. I think if you end up determining that your goal is unreachable, okay, and unreachable within the time frame that makes your goal viable, then you would have to modify your goal. Then you would have to adapt to the current situation. There's no point in living a passionless life. So at some point you have to modify your goal to a point where it is something you can achieve and something that you can feel passionate about. So I think in that sense, yes, you would have to modify your goal at some stage, but that's when you've determined that your goal is unachievable. I think before that I would not modify the goal. Yes, please. Can you talk a little louder so everybody can hear it? Right. Please.
How to choose between a PhD in management or PhD in technology if particularly a person is equally inclined towards both?
So the question is, how would you choose between a PhD in technology versus one in management if you were equally inclined towards both dimensions? Yeah, no, that's a good thought. If you want to be a professional student, then you could do that. Do both.
Flip the coin.
Yeah, that's another way. I think I'd rather turn the question back to you and say, what is your goal in life? Sorry? To become an entrepreneur. I think if you want to, my experience is that if you want to become an entrepreneur, your success rate is going to be the highest if you became a marketeer, not a technologist. And the reason is because good marketeers are very hard to find. It's not easy for a technologist to become a marketeer. And there's no guarantee that a technologist will necessarily identify the space where there'll be a product demand that the technologist with his core competence can fill. Whereas a marketeer can find opportunities that somebody else has developed a product whereby his marketing skills, he can make that person successful. So I think the odds of a marketeer succeeding as an entrepreneur is much higher. So if you were doing it on a cost benefit basis, right, or odds of success basis, then I would tend to go towards marketing with a very strong orientation, recognizing that you're marketing for a startup and that you have to learn all the marketing skills that it takes to be able to sell a product which does not have millions of dollars of marketing funding behind it. But I'm not sure that a PhD in management would necessarily take you in that direction. But I think sooner than later you could start in a technology space, maybe forget your idea of PhD in technology anyway. Start in an engineering space with your background in technology, but move very quickly into marketing and build your career in marketing. I think that's the direction I would take. Had I to redo what I did, of course, given the success I had, maybe I'd just live it the way I had. But if I didn't have that success as something to guide me today, I think I would have gone towards marketing as a career first, and then try to modify, to spin my way into being an entrepreneur. Because when I look at some of the companies I'm involved with that are in the high-tech space still, the biggest problem we have is finding good marketeers. And good marketeers usually become CEOs of the company. You may not be the entrepreneur. Yes.
So, when you decided to be unemployed for the 1 year, you had this $100,000 in the bank. How was your family's response? Sorry,
answer or you want me to answer? I think she's being very, very. She delegates a lot to me, as you can tell, so you know who the boss is. So I'll tell you her response. She cut back on shopping, which was very painful, I'm sure, knowing her. And we cut back dramatically on the kind of groceries we buy. And we could not cut back on the mortgage bill, we were stuck with that.
You can live on very small expenses because you have everything in the house.
Yeah, you can live on a lot less. I think that's what we
We
done.
cannot, but we can. So for 18 months, we really did not go shopping.
So we lived on a lot less, I think, is basically what the way it impacted the house. I think psychologically, if I did not have the consulting revenue, it would have affected me a little bit more. The fact that I could get digital equipment and Fairchild and National to pay me $1,000 for coming out for a day actually was very comforting. And sometimes digital would pay me that $1,000 even for coming for half an hour. Because my rule was, whether you use me for 10 minutes or a day, the charge is fixed. Right. So that was the model that I think helped a lot. I think sometimes you also get lucky. You know, one of the things that very important lesson I forgot is please do not discount the importance of luck. You could do the best job in the world in planning a startup and executing a startup and finding everything. You also need luck. And I have to tell you that I strongly believe in that luck plays a very significant role. Because there are lots of very, very smart people out there in the world, much smarter than Steve Jobs, forget about me, and who have not been successful, right? There is something to being at the right time at the right place. And I think that also plays a very significant role. So I do not want to discount the importance of luck in success. Yes.
Just a bit on this. I would like to know a little more about your philanthropic activities.
Question is she wanted to know a little bit more about our philanthropic activities. So I think you know the thing that I strongly believe is that when you give what you have, okay, the happiness that comes with that giving is lasts a lifetime. Whereas when you consume it, the happiness that comes from the consumption lasts only for the instance that you take to consume whatever you used your money for. So when you take that model into account, you really realize that you don't need to spend very much on yourself. What you really ought to do is to buy your happiness, and when giving buys you the happiness, is so easy to do. So with that model, what we have done is, I think we've done about, I think 20 to 24% of our net worth we have put set aside for charity. And so a significant portion of that is allocated towards the Foundation for Excellence, which is the foundation that we use to fund bright but needy children in India. And then we have given to different causes in India as well as in the US. Like there's an organization called Maitri that my wife is very passionate about, because she feels that battered women must be taken care of. And I have never battered her, so it's not because of that. Sorry? Yes, yes. So she's on the board of that organization, and she's
Must be knowing Chitra Devakamani, right?
yes, yes.
She started. Yes.
So she's very involved with fundraising for that organization, along with a few other people. In fact, Komal, your daughter, is very, very intimately involved with that. And then there's an Indo-American community center that has been built in Milpitas, which has been built after the model of a Jewish community center. Very, very elaborate and fancy. We have contributed a lot towards that particular building. Then there are various organizations that are there, like Indian Literacy Project, and then there is what is that organization that Bhushan runs? Indians for Collective Action. So they actually are a funding organization that they collect money and then parcel it out to lots of other charities. So we do that. For the longest time, there was an organization called Shishu Mandir. I think it was run by the BJP. They used to build schools in India. When my father was alive, he used to get a lot of happiness from funding the schools. So I would happily give him the money so he could hand them over to the Shishu Mandirs, and they built a number of those in the UP area. What else can I think of? Then we've basically given to my alma mater, Carnegie Mellon, IIT Kanpur. So we have some funds that we've given to IIT Kanpur, to Carnegie Mellon, my children's school, Stanford. So these are kind of things, you know, it's more a matter of identifying a cause where you feel that it's going to be good use of money. So that's what you do.
About the cause part, so in terms of philanthropy, we see that the causes usually which motivate and move people are usually like the children's education or women's causes. Those are like primarily motivating causes. But do you think higher education can be a cause which can motivate philanthropy?
When you say higher education, you mean towards like a PhD program or postgraduate programs or what?
Yeah, so like in India we need a lot more improvement in the higher education now.
Right.
So increasing the infrastructure in terms of higher education and improving the existing structure, it needs a lot of external support.
Right. I think the question is, can there be philanthropy directed towards increasing the infrastructure to enable research and postgraduate studies in India, which I think could use a lot of improvement. I think absolutely, if you look at history, there are lots of philanthropists that have contributed to create institutions like Stanford, Harvard, and the others that have been very, very successful. I think in India, it's not going to be done with a small amount of money. It's going to require substantial investment and substantial donations. So I think it's going to come out of people who are in the billionaire category, relatively speaking, today's point of view, to be able to fund those kind of institutions. It's not going to happen with people who are in a 10-digit, like $50 million net worth or $20 million net worth, because for them to give that, it's not going to be even meaningful. It will be helpful, but it will not be the transformative amount that is required. I think to make a Institute for Higher Education, my guesstimate, and Dr. Jain would probably be the expert at it, my estimate is you would need at least $100 million to put a capability like that together that would be meaningful. And you'd have to pick a particular discipline or a small number of disciplines and focus on that.
My guess is that in Indian scenario where public money is used for higher education quite liberally, the public-private partnership would be really what we want. So when you look at IIT Bombay and IIT Kanpur, their models where 99% or 95%, 90% money will come to the top. Right. And the philanthropic money will be just to ensure good governance and good systems. To me, that model is very sustainable.
But you know, the part that I find missing in India, Sudhir, is in order to attract the best researchers in the world, you have to create an infrastructure and you have to create an incentive system. And sometimes it might require that you have to buy that. For example, one of the first lessons I learned in being an entrepreneur, sometimes you have to buy a customer. That means instead of giving him a product and taking money from him, I have to give him the product and money for him to become a user so that I can say that he's my user. And I teach that to other companies that I'm part of. I said, don't forget that your first few customers, they are not your customers, you are their customer. Okay? You should give them money and the product and then be able to use their name to say that you even have a customer. So I think in the same way, you have to create, we will literally have to buy our way into creating these advanced research institutions in India, and it's not going to happen. The organic growth is too slow. Look at what China is doing. I mean, that's a very simple way to replicate the model. Massive amounts of funding, governments not trying to be too bureaucratic about it, creating the infrastructure, attracting the brightest Chinese and Americans to come and work in their institutions. That's how they are funding all the massive PhD programs and the research work and the massive numbers of patents that they're producing regardless of the quality, but at least they're putting that momentum together. I think it's going to take something like that to bring that about in India. I think organic efforts will be too slow and maybe too late. Yes.
Are you bullish on Indian society?
Am I bullish on India? Absolutely.
Indian society.
I'm very bullish on Indian society because India is a huge market. And to me, actually, let me back up. Indians are one of the most enterprising and resilient people in the world. They can tolerate unbelievable amounts of hardship and still survive. And they are amazingly smart and amazing hustlers. So I think if you look at from a population standpoint, Indians are some of the smartest and market-oriented people and savvy people, jugadus, all of those kind of skills that are necessary to succeed in business. So that's why I'm very optimistic on India long term. I think India's biggest problem is our political system and our democracy. And if we can get politicians and bureaucrats to enable rather than disable business, I think India, there's nothing stopping it. And I think the success of India, in spite of the bureaucracy and the politicians, will ultimately allow us to force those people aside. So that's why I'm bullish on India.
Okay, any other question? Thank you very much.